The barn door hung broken on rusted hinges, creaking like bones in the Wyoming wind. Ezra Calhoun pushed through, rifle raised, expecting to find another corpse in this ghost town, called Devil's Hollow. Instead, he found something that made his blood freeze. There, in the shadows between rotting hay bales, sat a woman so tall her head nearly touched the rafters, even while sitting. Heavy iron chains wrapped around her wrists and ankles, bolted deep into reinforced posts. Her clothes hung in tatters, and dried blood caked the metal where it bit into her skin. But it was her eyes that stopped him cold. Blue as a frozen lake, they held no plea for mercy, no tears. Just a fierce, unbreakable will to survive that reminded him of his sister Sarah, right before the Washita River flames took her. This woman had been left here to die like an animal, but she was still breathing, still fighting. And in that moment, Ezra knew his 3 years of running from ghosts had just ended. Before we dive into the story, imagine being abandoned in chains, left to die alone in the darkness, with no one to hear your cries. What would you do if you stumbled upon someone in such desperate need? Would you risk everything to help, or would fear make you walk away? This story will challenge everything you believe about strength, survival, and the unexpected places we find salvation. Click the like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss tomorrow's incredible stories of human resilience and redemption. And please, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and what time it is there. We love connecting with viewers from every corner of the world. Now, let's continue with the story. Ezra's hands trembled as he set down his rifle. The woman watched him with the intensity of a trapped wolf, her massive frame tensing with each step he took closer. She had to be 7 feet tall, at least built like the Norwegian mountain folk his grandmother used to tell stories about. But there was nothing mythical about the very real chains that held her, or the angry infection spreading from where the iron had rubbed her wrists raw. "Easy now," Ezra whispered, pulling out his canteen. "I ain't here to hurt you." She didn't understand his words. That much was clear from her confused expression. But she understood the universal language of water. When he held the canteen to her cracked lips, she drank desperately, her eyes never leaving his face. Up close, he could see she was younger than him, maybe 30, with wheat-colored hair matted with dirt and blood. The wanted poster nailed to the barn wall told part of the story. Dangerous female giant, property of Cordell's Traveling Wonders, reward for return alive. Property. They'd labeled this woman property. Ezra's stomach turned as he recognized the bounty hunter signatures at the bottom. The Coulter brothers. Those bastards would chain their own mothers for gold, but even they'd apparently been too spooked to drag this woman back to whoever claimed to own her. Ezra's saddlebags held maybe 3 days of food if he stretched it. Beans, hardtack, some jerky, and a precious tin of peaches he'd been saving for Christmas. Looking at the woman's hollowed cheeks and the way her ribs showed through her torn dress, he knew she hadn't eaten in days, maybe longer. He pulled out his dented pot and started a small fire outside where she could see him through the barn's broken slats. No sudden movements. No surprises. Just slow, deliberate actions like he was gentling a spooked horse. The beans bubbled over the flames while he soaked the rock-hard biscuits in water to soften them. The woman watched every movement with those piercing blue eyes, her body tense despite her weakness. When he carried the steaming pot inside, she pressed back against the wall, chains rattling, fear mixed with desperate hunger on her face. "Food," Ezra said slowly, pointing to the pot. He took a spoonful himself, exaggerating his chewing to show it was safe. "See? Good." Something shifted in her expression. She pointed to herself and spoke a single word. "Astrid." Her voice was hoarse from disuse, but carried a musical accent he'd heard before in railroad camps. Norwegian, maybe Swedish. Then she pointed to him, questioning. "Ezra," he replied, touching his chest. "Ezra Calhoun." Astrid nodded slowly, then opened her mouth like a baby bird when he offered the spoon. The first bite made her eyes water. She ate slowly, carefully, fighting the urge to gulp it all down. Between bites, she tried to communicate, mixing foreign words with gestures. She pointed to her wedding ring, then made a slashing motion across her throat. Her husband was dead. Then she shook her head violently, holding her chained hands up in denial. She hadn't killed him. Ezra understood. He'd seen enough false accusations on the frontier to know justice was bought and sold like cattle. As she ate, he studied the chains. Heavy-gauge iron, probably from the railroad. The locks were modern, unpickable without tools. But the posts they were bolted to showed rot. With the right leverage, and time maybe, Astrid suddenly grabbed his wrist. Her hand could wrap entirely around it with fingers to spare, but her touch was gentle. She turned his palm up and traced the powder burn scarred there, then showed him her own arms. Defensive wounds covered them like a map of violence, old ones from what looked like whips, newer ones from fighting back. She pulled back her matted hair to reveal a partially healed gash where someone had struck her with something heavy. They sat in silence as she finished eating, two damaged souls recognizing themselves in each other. When Ezra offered her the tin of peaches, she shook her head, pushing it back toward him. But he opened it anyway, placing it in her hands. The sweetness made her close her eyes, and for just a moment, tears rolled down her dirt-stained cheeks. As the sun set through the broken roof, painting everything in amber light, Astrid spoke again. She touched the burn scar on Ezra's neck with one finger, her eyes questioning. He knew she was asking for his story, just as she'd shared hers through scars and gestures. Tomorrow, he thought. Tomorrow he'd try to explain about Washita River, about the children, about why he'd been riding alone for 3 years trying to outrun ghosts that followed him anyway. The abandoned mining office held more than dust and broken dreams. Ezra found them scattered across a moldy desk. Wanted posters, legal documents, and a contract that made his stomach turn. Magnus Cordell's signature sprawled across papers, declaring Astrid Hedvig Larsson mentally incompetent, unable to care for herself, a danger to society. The judge's seal looked official enough, but Ezra recognized the name, Judge Cornelius Blackwood, who'd hang his own mother for the right price. According to the papers, Cordell's traveling wonders of the world had legal custody of the female giant for her own protection and the safety of decent folk. The contract dated back 6 months, right around when Astrid's husband died. Convenient timing. Too convenient. Another document advertised her as the Norwegian giantess, marvel of the North. See the dangerous woman who killed her own husband. Admission, 50 cents. Ezra's hands clenched into fists. They'd turned her into a sideshow freak, caged and displayed like an animal. The dates on the tour schedule showed they'd traveled through 7 states, dozens of towns. 6 months of being gawked at, prodded, treated as less than human. No wonder the Coulter brothers had abandoned her here. Even those heartless bastards must have felt some shade of guilt. He grabbed every tool he could find, a rusted crowbar, a half-broken pickaxe, some mining equipment that might work on the chains. Racing back to the barn, he found Astrid trying to communicate something urgent. She'd drawn pictures in the dirt with a stick she could barely reach. Crude but clear, wagons approaching, men with guns, and what looked like a cage. "Cordell?" Ezra asked, and her eyes went wild with terror. She nodded frantically, then drew something else. The sun at different positions. Her best guess, 2 days, maybe 3 before they arrived. Ezra examined the chains more carefully. The locks were beyond him, but the posts were another matter. Dry rot had weakened the wood where the bolts went through. He started working with the crowbar, putting his back into it while Astrid pulled from her side. The post creaked but held. They'd need more than strength. They'd need strategy. That night, as Ezra worked by lamplight, trying different angles on the posts, Astrid began teaching him her language. Simple words at first. Ven meant friend, she indicated by pointing between them. Tillet meant trust, which she demonstrated by closing her eyes and letting him examine the infected wounds on her wrists without flinching. Fair meant danger, which she whispered while pointing toward the road. She drew more pictures, telling her story in images. Her small farm in Minnesota. Her husband Eric, a thin man who stood proudly beside her despite their size difference. Cordell's wagons arriving, Eric fighting the men who tried to take her, a gun firing, Eric falling. Being drugged, waking up in chains is Cordell's newest attraction. Towns blending together as crowds paid to see the monster woman who supposedly murdered her husband in jealous rage. Ezra shared his own truth through gestures and broken attempts at her language. He drew soldiers, fire, children running, pointed to himself, then covered his eyes in shame. Astrid understood. She reached through her chains to touch his shoulder, speaking a word he didn't need translated, Tilgevels, forgiveness. She was offering him what he couldn't give himself. Thunder shook the rotting barn walls as Wyoming's fury unleashed itself upon Devil's Hollow. Rain poured through the broken roof in waterfalls, turning the dirt floor to mud. Ezra had moved his bedroll close to Astrid to keep her dry as possible, but the storm trapped them in a strange intimacy. By flickering lamplight, she began revealing the map of cruelty written on her body. She rolled up what remained of her sleeves, exposing arms covered in precise, parallel scars. Whip marks laid down with cruel efficiency. She held up 5 fingers, then 2 more, 7 months since they started. Cordell's men had beaten her whenever she refused to perform, refused to roar like a beast for the paying crowds. She showed him her back through the tears in her dress. More lashes crossed there like railroad tracks. Drawing in the mud with trembling fingers, Astrid illustrated her life in Cordell's circus. A tiny figure of herself in a cage barely large enough to stand, crowds throwing things, children running away screaming while their parents paid extra to poke her with sticks. She drew Cordell himself, a man with a top hat and cruel smile, holding a whip in one hand and money in the other. Then she drew something that made Ezra's blood boil. Cordell forcing her to wear chains even when performing, telling crowds she was too dangerous to be fully released. "The truth," Ezra said slowly, knowing she couldn't understand all his words but needing to speak them. "You want me to know the truth?" Astrid nodded, then pointed at him. His turn, his truth. Ezra had never told anyone about Washita River. Not fully, but sitting in that storm-rattled barn with a woman who'd been caged for being different, he found himself drawing his own story. The 7th Cavalry. Orders to attack a Cheyenne camp at dawn. Him scouting ahead, seeing the women and children sleeping. His report ignored. The charge he couldn't stop. The fires that spread too fast. His sister Sarah, who'd married a Cheyenne man, trying to save the children. The beam that fell. The screams he still heard. He drew himself after, bottle in hand, gun in the other, almost using it before choosing to run instead. 3 years of drifting, working cattle drives, and avoiding anything that reminded him of who he used to be. The medals he'd thrown in the Platte River, the uniform he'd burned. Astrid studied his drawings for a long moment, then did something unexpected. She began to hum, low and mournful, a melody that seemed ancient as mountains. She pointed to his heart, then hers, then gestured at their scars. The humming continued, and somehow Ezra understood. This was how her people mourned, not with words, but with sound that came from deeper than language. The storm intensified, lightning illuminating the barn in stark flashes. In one brilliant moment, Ezra saw Astrid differently. Not a giant, not a victim, but a warrior who'd survived months of torture without breaking. Her size wasn't what made her dangerous to men like Cordell. It was her refusal to become the monster they tried to make her. She reached through her chains and took his hand. Her palm swallowed his completely, but she held it like it was made of glass. She spoke words in Norwegian, soft and certain, then tried in English. "You see me." "I see you," Ezra confirmed, squeezing back. "And you see me." They sat like that as the storm raged, 2 people who'd been broken by the world's cruelty finding something unbreakable in each other's recognition. Dawn came with hoofbeats. 3 riders moving fast from the east. Ezra recognized the lead man's profile against the rising sun. Jake Coulter, the younger of the bounty hunting brothers. They'd found fresh horses somewhere and come back to check their abandoned prize. Ezra stepped out of the barn, rifle casual in his hands but ready. "Well now, Jake drawled, reining up just out of easy shooting range. "Ezra Calhoun, heard you went soft after Washita. Guess it's true, playing nursemaid to that circus freak. Turn around, Jake. Nothing here for you." The other riders spread out, hands resting on their guns. Jake smiled, gold teeth glinting. "Cordell's offering $500 to whoever brings his property back. That's good money, Ezra. Hell, we'll cut you in for $100 if you just walk away." "She's not property. She's a person. According to Judge Blackwood, she ain't got the mental capacity to be considered such. Legal papers and everything." Jake pulled out a roll of bills, waving them. "Come on, soldier boy. Take the money and ride off. You don't want this fight." Ezra heard chains rattling behind him. Astrid had managed to see through the gaps in the wall. She was pulling against her restraints, eyes wide with rage and fear. The posts creaked but held. "Last chance," Ezra said quietly. "Leave now." Jake laughed. "Boys, I think the captain here needs a lesson in practical frontier economics." They came at him together. Ezra got one shot off, winging the second rider, before Jake's fist caught him in the jaw. He went down hard, tasting blood. Boots connected with his ribs, his back, his shoulders. They were careful not to kill him, just hurt him enough to make their point. Through the pain, he heard Astrid screaming. Not in fear, in fury. The barn wall exploded outward. That's the only way Ezra could describe it later. The entire section where Astrid's chains were bolted simply burst apart as she pulled with strength born of pure rage. 7 feet of Norwegian fury erupted from the barn, dragging broken posts and 30 pounds of iron chains behind her. Jake barely had time to scream before she grabbed him by the throat, lifting him off his feet like he weighed nothing. "No, hurt him," she roared in broken English, her first real attempt at his language. "You know hurt him." The other riders scrambled for their horses. Jake's eyes bulged as Astrid held him suspended, her massive frame trembling with controlled violence. She could snap his neck with a twitch of her fingers. They all knew it. But instead, she threw him into his fleeing partners, sending all 3 tumbling into the mud. "Tell Cordell," she said slowly, carefully forming each word. "Tell him, I come for him now. Not him. Come for me. I come." The riders fled without their horses, running like the devil himself was chasing them. Astrid stood there for a moment, chest heaving, chains still hanging from her bloody wrists. Then she turned to Ezra, and all that terrible strength melted into gentleness. She knelt beside him in the mud, those same hands that had thrown a grown man like a rag doll now carefully checking his injuries. "You hurt for me," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. No one ever." "You're free," Ezra croaked through split lips. "You broke free." She shook her head, gathering him up in her arms like he was a child. "No, we free. Together we free." Astrid tended to Ezra's wounds with the focused intensity of someone repaying a sacred debt. She'd found medical supplies in the abandoned mining camp and used them with surprising skill. Her massive hands, which could crush a man's windpipe, moved with delicate precision as she cleaned his cuts and wrapped his ribs. All the while, she practiced English words under her breath, determined to make herself understood. "My people," she began haltingly as she worked. "We have old way, old law." Ezra winced as she dabbed whiskey on a particularly deep cut. "What kind of law?" She struggled for words, then stood and acted it out. She pointed to him, made a motion of giving food and water, then pointed to herself. Then she reversed it, pointing to herself, protecting him from the riders. "You save me. I save you. Now we are." She frowned, searching for the right word. "Bunday." "Bound." "Like a debt?" "No." She shook her head fiercely. "Not debt. More. Like." She interlaced her fingers, showing how they locked together. "Cannot break. Will not break." She went to the horses Jake's men had abandoned and returned with saddlebags. Inside, she found what she was looking for: a tin of flour. She mixed it with water and ash from the fire, creating a paste. Before Ezra could ask what she was doing, She knelt before him, her 7-foot frame somehow making itself smaller, more humble. In my village, when two souls save each other, they become one protection, she said slowly. You are mine to guard. I am yours to keep. This is older than papers, older than American law. She dipped her finger in the ash mixture and drew a symbol on his forehead, a rune of some kind. Then she did the same to herself. She spoke in Norwegian, her voice taking on a ceremonial cadence. The words were foreign, but their meaning somehow clear. A vow, a promise, a claiming. Astrid, you don't owe me anything, Ezra started, but she pressed a finger to his lips. Not owe. Choose. She took his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. 3 years you ride alone, yes? The ghosts they follow? He nodded, surprised she'd understood that much from his drawings. My ghosts too. But together, maybe ghosts get tired. Maybe they leave. She pulled out a knife, and before Ezra could protest, she'd cut a lock of her wheat-colored hair. With practiced movements, she braided it into a ring, weaving it tight. In my country, this means protection. Means you are under my shield. She slipped it onto his finger. It fit perfectly. I don't know how to not be alone anymore, Ezra admitted quietly. Astrid smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her. It transformed her face from frightening to beautiful. I teach you. You teach me English. Fair trade. She stood then, all 7 feet of her, and pulled him to his feet. Even wounded, even exhausted, there was something magnificent about her. Not just her size, but her presence. She'd been caged, beaten, displayed, and broken. But she'd chosen to claim a broken soldier as hers to protect. Cordell will come, Ezra warned. With more men. With guns. Astrid's smile turned fierce. Good. I have words for him. And if words, not enough. She flexed her hands, the ones that had shattered those barn walls. I show him what giant woman can really do when protecting what is hers. Astrid moved through the Wyoming wilderness like she'd been born to it. Those weeks of being dragged through towns in Cordell's circus had taught her the land, but her real knowledge came from Norwegian winters where one mistake meant death. She showed Ezra how to read wind patterns, how certain birds warned of approaching riders, how to set traps using nothing but rope and balanced rocks. In my home, she explained while demonstrating a snare that could drop a man from his horse, we hunt bear and wolves. Men are easier. They are loud, stupid. They follow same paths. She was right. Cordell's hired guns rode in predictable patterns, searching the obvious hiding spots. They never expected to become the hunted. The first group of 4 lost their horses to Astrid's rope traps, sending them walking back to town. The second group found their water supply contaminated with herbs that caused temporary blindness, leaving them helpless until it wore off. No killing, not yet. Astrid insisted on giving warnings first. Death is easy, she told Ezra as they watched another group of riders from their hidden position. Fear is better. Fear makes them think, makes them wonder if money worth it. Ezra taught her military tactics in return, showing her how to use terrain for ambushes, how to create false trails, how to make 5 people seem like 50 with the right movements and timing. Together, they were formidable. Her strength and wilderness knowledge, combined with his strategic mind, created a partnership Cordell's men couldn't counter. At night, in caves or hidden valleys, Astrid continued teaching him Norwegian while he helped with her English. She showed him how her people survived winters that would kill most men, how they'd passed down fighting techniques from the old Viking days. She demonstrated a move where she could break a man's arm using just leverage and her height advantage. My grandmother, she said one evening while braiding more of her hair into rope. She was like me, tall, strong. Village men feared her until great-grandfather came. He was small man, like you, but brave. Saw her heart, not just size. What happened to them? Lived 40 winters together, had 7 children, all normal size except my mother. She was tall too. Astrid's eyes grew distant. Eric, my husband, he was like great-grandfather. Saw me, not monster. That's why Cordell killed him. Could not have me if someone saw me as person. They'd been picking off Cordell's men for a week when Astrid revealed something that changed everything. While setting snares one morning, she suddenly grabbed a tree for support, her face going pale. "What's wrong?" Ezra rushed to her side. She pressed a hand to her stomach, speaking rapidly in Norwegian before remembering to switch. "The sickness. Morning sickness. I carry Eric's child." Ezra felt the world tilt. A baby. She was pregnant. That's why she'd been so careful not to kill anyone yet. Why she'd been protecting her middle during their escapes. How long? 3 months. Maybe 4. Her hand trembled on her stomach. Cordell. He started to suspect. Said pregnant giant would bring more money. 2 freaks for price of 1. Rage flooded through Ezra, hot and familiar. The same rage he'd felt watching children burn at Washita. But this time, he could do something about it. "We end this." "Now." Astrid shook her head. "No, we do this smart. For baby, we must be smart." She took his hand and placed it on her stomach. "You help me protect?" "With my life," Ezra promised, and meant it. That night, she taught him a Norwegian lullaby, one her mother had sung. Her voice, usually rough from months of abuse, became sweet and clear. The melody floated through their hidden camp like a promise of better days, even as they prepared for the final confrontation they both knew was coming. The box canyon at Widow's Creek was perfect for a last stand. 30-foot walls of red rock on 3 sides, only one way in or out. Ezra had found it while scouting, and they'd spent 2 days preparing. Every military trick he knew, every trap Astrid could devise, all leading to this moment. Because Cordell wasn't just coming anymore. He was here, with 20 men and Judge Blackwood himself. They watched from the canyon rim as the circus wagons rolled into view. The largest wagon had iron bars, reinforced with steel plates. The cage meant for Astrid, or worse, for her child. Cordell rode in front, his top hat and red coat visible even from this distance. The man had style, Ezra had to admit. Evil style, but style nonetheless. "Remember the plan," Ezra whispered as they descended to their positions. "The narrow entrance forces them to come through 3 at a time. The rock slides are ready. And if everything fails, we fight," Astrid finished, checking the cavalry saber they'd found. In her hands, it looked like a normal sword. "For baby, we fight everything." Cordell's voice echoed off the canyon walls. "Mrs. Larson! My dear sweet giant, I know you're up there." "Come down peacefully, and I promise your friend won't hang. Judge Blackwood has already drawn up the papers." Astrid stood, making herself visible at the canyon entrance. Even at this distance, she was imposing. "Magnus Cordell!" Her voice boomed like thunder. "You killed Eric. You put me in cage like animal. Now you want my baby for your show." "Your baby?" Cordell's voice carried a sick excitement. "My dear, that's wonderful news. Think of the possibilities. The world's tallest woman and her giant offspring. We'll be rich." "I have different idea," Astrid called back. She held up something that made Cordell's men murmur nervously. The contracts, the false papers declaring her incompetent. She tore them slowly, deliberately, letting the pieces scatter in the wind. "These mean nothing, but this means everything." She pulled out a different paper. One, Ezra had helped her write in the abandoned assayer's office, using legal books they'd found. A proper will from Eric, witnessed and notarized before his death, declaring his wife of sound mind and naming her sole inheritor of their homestead. More importantly, it contained a sworn statement about Cordell's threats against them, filed with the territorial marshal 3 months before Eric's death. "You're lying," Cordell snarled. "That document is fake." "Real enough," Ezra called out, appearing beside Astrid. "And already sent copies to Fort Laramie, the territorial capital, and 3 newspapers. You're done, Cordell. Question is whether you walk away or get carried." Judge Blackwood rode forward, his face purple with rage. "You cannot threaten the law. I'll see you both hang." "With what authority?" Ezra pulled out his own surprise. His cavalry commission papers, never officially revoked. As an officer of the United States Army, I'm placing this woman under military protection as a civilian witness to murder and corruption. You want her, Judge? Take it up with the War Department." The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. 20 men with guns against 2 people defending a narrow canyon. The odds were still against them, but doubt rippled through Cordell's ranks. Fighting civilians was one thing. Fighting the Army, even one questionable officer, was another. Cordell made his decision. Take them. $500 to whoever brings me that giant bitch alive. The first wave of riders charged the canyon entrance. Astrid pulled the rope. The rock slide thundered down like God's own judgment, sealing the canyon entrance behind the first wave of riders and trapping them inside with Astrid and Ezra. 3 men down instantly, horses screaming. The survivors scrambled for cover as Ezra's rifle cracked from his position, using ammunition strategically to keep them pinned. But Cordell was smarter than expected. While his first team kept them busy, he'd sent climbers up the canyon walls. Astrid spotted them first, scaling the red rock like spiders. She grabbed the massive timber beam they'd prepared for this possibility, swinging it like a club to knock the first climber back down. The man screamed as he fell 20 feet onto sharp rocks. "The wagon!" Ezra shouted. "He's bringing up the wagon!" Through the dust and chaos, they could see Cordell's men pushing the circus wagon forward, using it as cover. The iron cage meant for Astrid was now their battering ram. Behind it, Judge Blackwood waved papers and shouted about lawful arrest, as if legal words could stop what was coming. Astrid did something Ezra hadn't expected. She laughed. Deep and wild, it echoed off the canyon walls like rolling thunder. Then she walked straight toward the wagon, dragging the cavalry saber behind her, sparks flying as metal met stone. "You want giant woman?" she roared. "You want monster for your show! I give you monster!" She reached the wagon before anyone could react. Her hands, those incredible hands that had been so gentle with Ezra's wounds, grabbed the iron bars. The metal groaned. Men scrambled backward as she began to pull, muscles standing out like rope under her skin. The cage door ripped off its hinges. She threw it aside like paper, then grabbed the wagon's front axle. "Impossible," Cordell breathed, but it wasn't. Astrid lifted the entire front of the wagon and flipped it, sending men diving for cover. The crash shook the entire canyon. Judge Blackwood tried to run, but Astrid caught him by his coat. She lifted him to eye level, this corrupt man who'd signed papers declaring her an animal. "You," she said quietly, which was somehow more terrifying than screaming. "You made legal to cage people, to sell mothers and babies. Please," he whimpered. "I was just following the law." "Wrong law," she said, and threw him into a thorny brush. Not fatal, but he'd remember it every time he sat down for months. Cordell himself stood alone now. His men fled or defeated, but he still had one card to play. He pulled out a gun, aimed not at Astrid but at her stomach. "One shot," he said coldly. "Even if you reach me, one shot and your precious baby dies." Time slowed. Ezra saw Astrid freeze, her hand protective over her belly. Saw Cordell's finger tighten on the trigger, and moved without thinking, using the one skill from Washita he'd never wanted to use again. The knife left his hand in a perfect arc, battlefield training taking over. It struck Cordell's wrist, sending the gun flying. Astrid crossed the distance in 2 strides. She grabbed Cordell by the throat, lifting him as easily as she'd lifted the judge. But this time was different. This was the man who'd killed Eric, who'd tortured her for months, who'd threatened her unborn child. "Please," Cordell gasped. "I'll give you anything. Money. Freedom. Anything." Astrid looked him in the eyes. "You took everything. Eric. Freedom. Dignity. Almost took my soul." Her grip tightened. "But you failed. I am not monster. I am mother, and mother protects." The crack was audible throughout the canyon. Cordell's body went limp. Astrid dropped him without ceremony, then turned to face the remaining men who watched from beyond the rock slide. "Go," she said simply. "Tell everyone, the Norwegian giantess is dead. Only Astrid lives now, and if anyone comes for Astrid or her family, She gestured at the destruction around them. "This is mercy compared to what I do next time." They ran. 6 months had passed since Widow's Creek. The abandoned homestead in the mountains had become something neither Ezra nor Astrid had dared to dream of: home. They'd claimed it legally, using Eric's will and Ezra's military connections to secure the deed. The cabin, rebuilt with Astrid's strength and Ezra's skill, stood solid against the mountain winds. Here, her height was an advantage. She could reach the highest shelves, repair the roof without a ladder, and see danger coming from miles away. Spring arrived with wildflowers and Astrid's labor pains. For all her strength, childbirth brought her to her knees. Ezra, who delivered calves and foals but never a human baby, found himself relying on her instructions between contractions. She taught him Norwegian prayers and curses in equal measure as the hours stretched on. "If baby is giant like me," she gasped during a brief respite, "you run. Save yourself." "Stop talking nonsense," Ezra said, wiping sweat from her forehead. "Besides, I already told you, I don't run anymore." The baby came with the dawn. A girl, perfect and pink and miraculously normal-sized. Astrid wept as she held her daughter, this tiny miracle who would never be caged for being different. The baby had Eric's dark hair, but Astrid's fierce blue eyes, already staring at the world like she was ready to fight it. "Hope," Astrid whispered. "Her name is Hope." "It's perfect," Ezra agreed, his own eyes wet as this small life gripped his finger with surprising strength. They built a life in these months. Astrid's English had become fluent, though she kept her accent that made every word sound like music. She'd taught Ezra Norwegian, enough that they could speak in their private language when they went to town for supplies. The townspeople had been suspicious at first of the tall woman and the scarred soldier, but Astrid's gentleness with children and Ezra's help during a barn raising had slowly won them over. No one mentioned the stories they'd heard about a giant woman in a traveling circus. That was someone else, from somewhere else. This was just Astrid Calhoun, the tall Norwegian woman who could lift a fallen tree by herself and whose husband had served in the cavalry. The fiction became truth through daily living. They'd married quietly in the fall, a simple ceremony with the circuit preacher. Astrid had worn wildflowers in her hair and a dress she'd sewn, herself, finely sized for her proper proportions. Ezra had shaved for the first time in years and worn his one good shirt. When the preacher pronounced them married, Astrid had lifted Ezra off his feet for their first kiss as husband and wife, causing the witnesses to laugh and applaud. Now, as Hope nursed hungrily at her mother's breast, Astrid spoke in the voice she saved for important moments. "You fed me when I was nothing," she said, the English perfect now, but carrying the weight of her native tongue. "Gave me water when I was dying, saw person when world saw monster. Now we feast on life together." Ezra sat beside them on the bed they'd built wide enough for Astrid's frame, his arm around both mother and child. Outside, the mountain wind sang through the pines. His ghosts from Washita still visited sometimes, but less often. Astrid's nightmares of cages and crowds had faded too. They'd replaced their separate darknesses with shared light. "You broke free," Ezra reminded her, kissing her temple. "You broke those chains yourself." Astrid smiled, adjusting Hope in her arms. "No, we broke them. Together." She looked at their daughter, then back at him. "And now we teach her to never need chains broken. To always be free." Hope yawned, tiny fist waving in the air. 3 souls in a mountain cabin, none of them alone anymore. The lonely cowboy had found his family. The giant widow had found her home. And their daughter would grow up knowing that strength came not from size or force, but from choosing to see the humanity in others and having the courage to claim it for yourself. The sun set over the mountains, painting their small world gold. Tomorrow there would be chores and challenges. But tonight there was only this: a woman no longer caged, a man no longer running, and a child who would know nothing but love. They'd fed each other when they were starving. Now, as Astrid had promised, they would feast on life together. Before we close this incredible story, I want you to imagine the courage it takes to break free from the chains that bind us, whether they're made of iron or indifference. Astrid and Ezra found each other in the darkest of places and chose to see light. They chose love over fear, connection over isolation, and in doing so, they transformed from broken souls into a family. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that we all have the power to break free and claim our lives, then click the like button and subscribe to the channel. Tomorrow, I'll share another powerful story that will remind you that sometimes the greatest love stories begin with the simplest act of human kindness. And for now, I'm curious, where in the world are you listening to this story? And what time is it there? Share in the comments below. Your presence here from every corner of our planet makes these stories truly universal. Until tomorrow, remember, we're all writing our own stories of redemption, one choice at a time.